Here's Queers. Today on the Big Gay Agenda, we're joined by Simona Sushna, the incredible director of photography from Heartstopper seasons 2 and 3. Welcome to the podcast, Simona.
Hey, thanks so much. Lovely to meet you guys, and thanks for the invitation.
Of course, we spent hours gushing about how amazing Heartstopper is as a production, and so we're so excited to talk to somebody who made that happen.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to also speak to people outside of the film industry because so many times, like whenever I speak about my work, it's to outlets that are, just focused on the cinematography part of it, which I guess like it makes sense. But I feel like now it's nicer to reach like even a wider audience. And what's been kind of funny to me is that whenever there's been an article published about my work in British Cinematographer or in some other magazine, the fans read it and they even send me messages about it or like comment on my Instagram posts. So people have been very, how should I say, like very open and also very interested in my cinematography work, which is a very new experience for me. Usually don't really have that direct contact with an audience like I have been on Heartstopper. So that's been really lovely.
That's incredible, and I'm glad you're able to connect with fans because yeah, our fans are very eager to hear from you. And so just first question, pretty basic. There's a lot of different roles on set, a lot of different people that make a production come together. Some of them sound similar, but the responsibilities are different. So first question is, what does your job as director of photography involve, and how is it different from what the director does?
Yeah, so I work very closely with the director, but my department is just very different because I'm the head of the camera department, but I'm actually running both camera and lighting department. Although on the lighting side, I'm working with a gaffer who just manages, their department also from a kind of practical and health and safety point of view. But I guess first things first, when I'm hired as a DP, like my role is to I guess like go through the script and sort of like propose my own ideas on how, like the TV show or the film or anything, like commercial music video could be approached visually. So I'm, interpreting the material, in a slightly different way than the director would do. Although, the director themselves, depending on how visual they are and how sort of interested in that they are, they will have their own idea on how they want to, like visually storytell a TV show, let's say, because we're talking about Heartstopper now. So like my role as a DP is to sort of like dive into that maybe a little bit more. But when it comes to the practical side, I'm running 3 departments within my own side of things where I'm working with camera, with lighting, and with grip to make sure that the director's vision is really translated into the episodes. So it's just like a more technical department than the directors, and we are also less involved with the actors, at least in the pre-production side. Like we're not involved in casting and anything like that. But when it comes to the work on set, we do have contact with the actors, particularly if you're a director of photography who also likes to operate, like I was on season 2. You're always speaking with the actors, you're in contact about, hey, we're like framing you in a close-up, you need to be here, and like you give people some marks if you like to work like that. Sometimes we did that on Heartstopper, although it was like a very spontaneous process and we didn't really want to impose limits on the younger actors. Some of them didn't really have like a previous experience in front of the camera, so I think we didn't really want to burden them with the technical aspect of filmmaking. But I would always be communicating with Joe or with everyone really about how we're framing them, particularly with Heartstopper. The actors are so young. There's also like a physical closeness between us, like particularly in the intimacy scenes. There's also like an aspect of like, hey, I'm gonna be here with the camera, like particularly if I'm like filming a close-up, right? Like the camera is gonna be 20 centimeters away from your face, letting you know this is happening. Are you comfortable with that? Or how can I make your job a little bit easier? Because them as actors, they're also very vulnerable in front of the camera, and I take that, responsibility on my side, like very seriously, and also try to create with my crew and with the crew at large, always try to create an environment where actors feel comfortable and safe, where they don't feel sort of like too exposed, or sometimes some DPs might tend to focus so much on the technical side where it just becomes a little bit alienating for the actors. So anyway, that's sort of like my connection with the actors. But purely, my role as a DP is to go through the script, understand what the script is, like trying to say, what's the message ultimately, what does the director want to achieve with this. Also, the creative producers are really important, especially in television. They will have their own vision and how the TV series needs to look or feel, and it becomes like a collective collaboration with the director and the showrunner. And I am, I guess, like the leader and the person in charge, making sure that that vision is actually achieved from a visual point of view. So yeah, like there's more to talk about, but I guess we can also touch on prep. What does the DP do in prep later on, and I can sort of like expand on this if interested.
Yeah, no, but I was wondering that because you were mentioning like pre-production, like that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, what does your prep work kind of look like? It sounds very technical from what you're saying, and a lot
Yeah,
of
I mean,
moving parts.
it is technical and also like very creative, right? Because I think like my work in film as a DP, but particularly film work in general, is a technical art. Like if you don't have very specific tools, you can't achieve certain effects or, like visual ideas, right? So we rely heavily on the tools on the technical side. And that's why, like, that's where I come in as a DP. Like, I understand the technical side. A director might not have the same experience or knowledge or awareness as I do. But then I come in and I'm like a key player in understanding what they want to say and how do we visually translate that into, like the shots we capture for the TV series. So I am in a way like I'm enabling the director to tell the story and to share their vision.
That makes so much sense. That's really, really cool. From what we gathered by researching you, Heartstopper was your first TV project after working on indie films and documentaries. So how did your indie film background shape your approach to Heartstopper, like doing Heartstopper, the series?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been kind of a long journey coming into television because for a very long time, I didn't feel it was like the environment for me, like particularly because of my interest in indie drama. And when Heartstopper came along, I felt like that's the right project for me to start television with because I felt very close to the characters. They were, like very young people, and I felt like the series and Alice's work was very focused on the characters. So that connected with my previous work, where in documentary we were filming real people, telling real people's stories and interacting with their like lives, right? Like it was nothing, it wasn't fictionalized. So I've always been very drawn to the story side rather than like a very intricate plot. For me, characters are really important, and that's also something that I've done in indie drama and short films. And generally my work is character led. My camera work is informed by who the characters are, what's the conflict in the TV series or the film, what's the general arc, what's the character transformation. That really inspires me and dictates on how I approach, visually telling that story. So I made sure that when I started Heartstopper, I was first of all like in touch with the director about that all the time. So that was, the focus in our conversations when we were in prep, like trying to understand also what's the story about, from the director's point of view, obviously from Alice's point of view, because this is based on a graphic novel. But the fact that I was just focused on characters before in my previous work, I really carried that through. And for me, what's really important, and as a cinematographer, is to stay true to the story and represent the characters in an honest way. And I think people really responded to that. And even though us as DPs, we want to create beauty and something that people connect with visually, I was making sure that it's about the characters first and not about just creating meaningful, like images that are not meaningful or truthful.
Yeah, I would say you absolutely nailed it with Heartstopper. That's one of the things we comment constantly on how the scenes are really tailored to the characters. It's really happy to hear that it was so character focused, like from your perspective as well. And
Yeah, for sure. And the characters are growing and getting more complex with each season, and that's
right.
been so interesting to explore, particularly because from season 2 to season 3 we changed directors, and that was refreshing because when Andy came on board on season 3, obviously he brought on his own vision on what Heartstopper was, particularly because season 3 gets into like more serious themes. So then we also had to adapt, I guess, like the storytelling process or more like the visual approach to making sure that these themes are also told visually with the way that they need it. Like it's less dreamlike. Season 3, it's a lot more kind of grounded in reality, and I think again, like it's about honesty and just making sure that when we're telling the story, we're not glamorizing it in any way.
Yeah, it definitely the evolution from season 2 to season 3 was quite remarkable because I like the way you put that. It comes out of this like romantic, dreamy state into this more reality situation, particularly like Charlie's mental health. And I feel like the cinematography definitely reflects that because you get like more darker tones and like when Charlie's spiraling and things like that. So yeah, definitely like nailed it. Oh, it's so good. All right, so you already answered some of these questions. So is there a particular shot or scene in Heartstopper that you're especially proud of?
That's a good question. I guess if I were to focus on season 2, like I loved the prom in season
Oh,
2. Like
yes.
it took quite a while to prep, particularly because we filmed it like towards the end of the schedule. So we were already maybe filming for like 10 weeks at that time. And it just took a lot of coordination between departments. Like my department is a DP, but also with a production designer, costume designer, choreography, and that was also just a lot of fun to work on because the schedule on Heartstopper was very tight. So like beyond the visual side and how we wanted to tell the story, there was an element of like, how do I make this happen and tell the story in 2 days? Like, how do you get all of that material in 2 days? So like from a practical point of view, I had to create an approach that enabled me to shoot 360 within that space. And also, again, like for the designer to dress all that space, and just making sure that again like we're kind of maintaining that standard when it comes to like the quality of what we're shooting. So yeah, the prom was a lot of fun. Like we created this specific rig. Everything was, well, mostly everything was rigged from the top. So again, the actors didn't want to, like I didn't want the actors to be aware of like stands and lights on set. Like everything was free, and in a way that I think it immerses the crew and the actors more into the scenes and into the moment. So again, like making sure that they have all the freedom they need. So again, we created this like very specific rig, and that was a lot of fun. But I think other than that, it's just maybe the Paris, the Paris scenes in season 2 again. Like I love shooting those. A very different energy than what we were filming in London, and that was a lot of fun, particularly because we had access to these crazy locations. Like we filmed twice on the Eiffel Tower. We were in the Louvre for like a full day, and this is kind of surreal. Like we were watching the sunrise from the Eiffel Tower at 6 a.m. These are the like kind of priceless moments when you're a filmmaker. You're put in these situations that maybe like other people don't really have access to. And I guess like with season 3, there was less of that, I don't know, like really iconic locations that you go to. But I think with season 3, it was more like the very intimate kind of like closeness with the actors that I really loved. And that's really throughout the season. I don't think there's like a particular scene that stands out to me in that way. And it was just very fun to work with Andy, our season 3 director, and just like making that intimacy happen. So yeah, like a very different sort of atmosphere from season 2.
Yeah, it must be really challenging to pick one scene because, like you mentioned, there's such a variety of different types of scenes in this show, and they're all so beautiful and different. So I'm glad there's a bunch that stick out in your mind. and all of them were
Yeah.
iconic that you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, also like I guess in season three, because we changed our visual approach slightly, like we kind of made it a little bit more grounded and
Mhm.
like if you want more serious, I guess like the parties were fun because the parties had to be, sort of singled out and somehow like each of the party had to have its own identity visually. So then that was really interesting to craft because there's like quite a few of them. There's a birthday party, there's New Year's, there's Halloween. And Halloween was a lot of fun because, like the
Super
production
fun.
design was kind of crazy. And yeah, like we built a very specific color palette for that, where we didn't want any of the classic kind of approach where you have like a lot of orange in the design or in the lighting. So we went with like much cooler colors. And, that was something that I really enjoyed working on.
Halloween scenes are always fun. I feel like there's a lot to play with.
Yeah, and the designer, like without even talking about it, the designer decided she didn't want to use any orange in the dressing, which I thought was very refreshing. And then I had an idea of my own that I was, like I was meant to communicate that to her that, hey, let's just use a lot of purples and pinks and greens and, just kind of create something a little bit different. And it turns out that before we even spoke, we had like similar ideas. So that was great.
Meant to be. That's so great. So you mentioned in season 3, one of the changes is that there's different types of intimacy scenes that happen, but there's also like, intimate moments in season 2 and season 3. So how do you approach building visual intimacy between characters through framing and the composition?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we did talk a lot about the intimacy scenes because we wanted them to feel authentic and honest. We didn't want to, hide things or like not really show nudity. And I think we found the right balance, particularly because again, the characters are very young. So you have to be mindful of that. But also, for us, the focus between Charlie and Nick particularly was about the love between them, and not only like the romantic love, the friendship between them. And I think that really guided us. So when it came to like capturing that, for us it was the closeness with the camera that really told that story. Like I even mentioned before, we were like very close, sometimes even filming with two cameras. And that's not something that we talk much about, but there was this sort of like unspoken trust between all of us that was really interesting to have, between us with actors, between myself and the director. And I think generally the actors felt very comfortable when it came to filming the intimacy scenes, like with us, but also between each other. And it was just important to, like make sure that we kind of captured that trust and like feeling okay in each other's presence. And it was, like the handheld camera, just maintaining that sort of emotion with the handheld camera. Sometimes a static camera might just feel a bit too rigid in those moments. So handheld was very important, working with longer focal lengths at times to maybe like pinpoint specific moments in their intimacy scenes. But otherwise, we also used wider lenses, like very close to their faces or very close to their hands, or, like using shoulders in the foreground, trying to create a sense of depth, but also like a sense of a journey, because there's not only, like there's more to the intimacy scenes than the actual intimacy. Is also the trust that they build, between each other. So just sort of like witnessing that with a camera and, kind of capturing snippets of their conversations. And yeah, that was again like interesting to do with, being close with a camera to them.
Yeah. I definitely do love. I like what you said about the depth and like kind of the close up shots of like their hands or their shoulders when they're kind of like transitioning throughout the intimacy scenes. Because I agree with you. It goes back to what you're saying about like the character focusedness of all of that versus
Yeah.
like just the aesthetic of what is happening. So I do appreciate that variety. It really does make it very impactful and more intimate, like you're saying.
Yeah, and I guess like when it came to the lighting side of it, we didn't want to make it very dark, but we
Mhm.
wanted to maintain that balance between, just creating something that feels a little bit more moody. And when it came to the T-stop, we were just shooting quite shallow, so the backgrounds were quite out of focus. And the idea behind that was to really kind of capture the gentleness between them, so the image feels soft and inviting. So that was the approach throughout the intimacy scenes, really. And we worked also with a brilliant intimacy coordinator, which we also had on board on season 2. So there was also a journey, like between us working together and knowing what we can do together, and that's really important. And also David, as an intimacy coordinator, he really understood, like where the camera needs to be and building those moments for the camera. Sometimes, when you're filming intimacy, it almost feels like a dance. So there's like steps to it, right? So then you have to also work for the camera to make sure that those angles work. But at the same time, like we didn't really impose that much restriction, like when it came to, hey, you have to be here and look there for the camera. It was more like sort of in a documentary way, right, where they're having their moment and we're there to capture it. And we looked at very specific references of, how, like certain stills were composed, and we thought, oh, this is very gentle and intimate. I think we should have a similar approach. So like between me and my operator and Andy, the director, on season 3, we just made sure that, again, there's this kind of like continuity between the intimacy scenes, but again, just letting them do their thing rather than like being too strong, like on the focusing too much on the technical side.
Yeah, it seems like there's a balance that has to kind of be struck between all of that so that it reads as authentic and natural, like when you get the final product, basically, which it does. It really does.
Mm.
All right. You've mentioned that in previous interviews that like one of your references for the intimacy scenes was like blue is the warmest color. And I'm wondering how you kind of took like a reference like that and translated the elements that you liked into Heartstopper.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm looking at references, like I try to be very careful how much I'm looking at films, and that was an exception because I felt like blue is the warmest color was like beautifully captured. Like the intimacy and the closeness between the main characters was like very beautifully created. With the camera, and that was just for me as a kind of tone and kind of visual reference. But I didn't really think, oh, they've done it like that and I'm going to do it like this. It was just, something that inspires me and raises questions that are, like I'm applying those ideas and questions to the script that I'm working with. But I'm always very mindful of looking at other people's work and trying to take it like in a very literal reference, because that, without realizing, you might end up like copying somebody's work. And I really don't like that, particularly because every script is different, the actors are different, the situations are different. But I felt like that film was beautifully achieved when it came to like, how free the whole, like the actors movement was and how spontaneous the scenes felt. And I really liked that. So it was maybe like the spirit of the camera work that I sort of embraced from that film. And generally, I like to look at stills. I find stills, again, like very character focused, because often I'm looking at portraits or documentary photography that involves people in real situations. And that's, to me, like more inspiring than particularly like looking at like certain films or like very specific scenes from other filmmakers' work.
Yeah. So like speaking of references, so this project too, it comes from the graphic novel. So there kind of is like a visual reference or reference material, but prior to like the show coming out. So I'm curious, how did Alice's original artwork influence your cinematography choices, like at all? Or were there any specific moments from the novels you tried to recreate on screen that you were inspired by?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Alice's work is very strong visually. She's very talented as an artist and as a storyteller. And I really loved her framing. And I felt like she was she frames in a very similar way like I do. But obviously, when you're drawing things out, you have a lot more flexibility in creating maybe like stronger perspectives that are not necessarily like as easily achieved in real life. Although I feel like we did really push to try to get as close as match to what Alice was drawing, like particularly on season 2, we were following the graphic novel like very, I guess, like very strictly when we could, and we were trying to match what Alice was drawing. Like she had a trip to Paris for her research, and that informed her drawing. And then the director and I, Eros, we were looking at her drawings, and when we were, let's say, in the Louvre, we were like, okay, yeah, that's the image. This is what we're trying to create, thinking of the lenses, thinking of the angles. Whereas with season 3, we did follow it carefully, but we were not as specific with, I guess, like recreating like very specific images from the graphic novel, or not as often. There's like not one scene that comes to my mind now from season 3 where we were like, oh, it needs to be exactly this. Like maybe the beginning of the season, with Tori in her room, but yeah, we were more looking at how, how do the images feel in Alice's work, and how does inspire that, if how does it inspire us to frame, and what are the angles. And we kind of maintained a very similar approach like in season 2, right? Like we used the wide lenses, we had a lot of low angles or a lot of top angles, which are, these are very specific to graphic novels. And we really embraced that. And I feel like it worked very well for both seasons. But I think it was more season 2 where we were trying to replicate like very specifically what Alice was drawing. But I think apart from that, like in Alice's work, there's a playfulness. And again, like there's a closeness to the characters, which really spoke to me. And when I decided to interview for Heartstopper, it was, like through her novels, because the scripts were not available at that time. It was very like an early stage. So I read them so fast. I was like so involved in the storytelling, and I really enjoyed it. And I was like, I really want to know more. And that was a lot of fun, for me to discover, and such an amazing, source of inspiration for a DP to have that.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Like it must be nice in general to have like some kind of reference material when doing fiction to be like, okay, I have the book, but to have like the graphic novel with like the visual component must be something else, because that's not always the case when you're adapting work.
Yeah,
And
no,
yeah.
100%. And there was already a vision in her work, like she
Yes,
already
that.
framed that work. She already framed that world. And it was very interesting for me to discover that through her eyes. And I think she's also a very original, artist. Like she frames in such a beautiful way, and in quite an unconventional way too, which I really, really like.
Yeah, I do. I love that so much. Something else that we really love about, I mean, her novels are great, but about the show in particular is there's a lot of what we call like pride flag Easter eggs throughout the show. So I'm just curious, how did you use color to reinforce themes like characters' identities like throughout the show?
Yeah, I guess like I personally feel close to the community because of, like close friends of mine, or I've worked in the past on other short films that had similar themes or gay characters in it. So I was like very, in a way, like very comfortable in the world, right? So it wasn't something new to me that I needed to discover. And generally, like I have a passion for color, and I try to implement color in lighting as much as I can. So for me, Heartstopper was just such a great playground where I could use color to really, I guess, like bring something of the playfulness of the community and the world and originality. And particularly in season 2, I made sure that, for instance, the prom in episode 8, like my theme was like the rainbow color. So there was just so much color all over, and that was a lot of fun to play with, like, you don't often have that opportunity in film. You have to stay true to the story. And if the story doesn't allow you to use that strong color in the way Heartstopper did, you can't really force it. Or if you do force it, it doesn't feel honest. So for me, Heartstopper was just such a great opportunity to really play with the things I loved. Those are things that I used in my work before, but I could bring it to a new scale and also open it to like a much larger audience. So it was particularly through using color and lighting. And there's a very short moment between Tao and Elle where they have their first kiss. They're running around in the Paris hotel, and I used two light sources that I put in a rainbow mode. We chose particular colors. So if you look at those shots, their shadows are all colorful. So you don't really achieve that effect, like normally you wouldn't have that much color in the shadow. And I used a similar technique again in season 3 when we filmed an intimacy scene between Tao and Elle, and I used the same lighting but to a much bigger scale. We created a rig that had a lot of Astera tubes, and we dialed in very specific colors. So again, we get a lot of color in the shadow. So just trying to, I guess, like remind people of the pride flag in some way or another. But sometimes it's just very subtle, and sometimes it's really out there, like in the prom.
And you just gave me another reason to go back and watch Heartstopper to look for those Tao and Elle scenes. No, that's so. I just love everything about that. I'm glad you brought up the prom scene because that's when you think of like the rainbow lighting. That's probably the biggest one that comes to most people's minds. So I'm curious, how did the lighting design come together, given that nearly 90 sources of light were used, which is wild.
Yeah, I think we had even more than that. I mean, first of all, it was a very large space. We had a lot of extras, like we really reproduced like a teenager's prom to the regal scale. I think we had like over 100 extras plus our cast. So, when it comes to the actual number of sources, it's also in relation to the space that you're lighting. And what I did is I built a lighting diagram that I presented to my gaffer, who helped me achieve, the whole setup. So I made sure that I'm, communicating all the colors that I wanted, and we just dialed those into the sources of light. So we almost exclusively worked with LED lights, with the exception of some moving lights, which are very often used in, like stage shows or parties and concerts. But the LEDs are amazing because you can change the intensity of light easily. You can dim up and down, change the colors, change the saturation of the colors. So again, like I was thinking about the palette that I want, and also made sure that there's sort of like a concept to when it comes to, oh, this is the corner where they take the photos, like they come in and then there's this really lovely area where they take photographs together. So then that had a very specific color palette. When we went to the stage, the concert, there was a lot of red and generally a lot warmer colors. So I made sure that I just again, like communicated to my gaffer that all of that needs to be programmed. We also worked with a desk operator who was brilliant. He was so fast. And again, they make sure that from a technical point of view, all of these colors are dialed into the lights themselves, into the sources of light. So then everything sort of like has has a continuity and like a purpose together. So if you don't have that, it might just be a little bit I don't know, it kind of doesn't make sense, or it doesn't really kind of give the message out to the audience. And yeah, I guess like the number of sources also came from the necessity of lighting a really large space. We even used UV lighting, which was a lot of fun. And some of the characters' costumes, like their outfits, had some UV I guess like paint on them, or even the makeup, so then that would react to the to the UV light. So that was a lot of fun. So we worked closely with the costume designer, with the makeup artists, to make sure that those little details are there, even though again they're very subtle, like some people might not even notice them.
Again, another reason to go back and watch that scene. That's really cool. Like to be able to play with the light and the costume. That's super fun.
Yeah, it's nice to see, like the two elements interact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned like that was just such a big scene just in general, because like the scale of the location. And it sounds like there was so many moving pieces in that particular scene out of necessity for what you were trying to achieve and all the different areas that you mentioned. So it sounds like that was a pretty technically difficult like shot or like scene, but were there any other like technically difficult shots that you had to pull off in like season 2 or 3?
I guess like technically they were not very challenging. Like there's very specific shots. For instance, in season 3, there's a moment between Nick and Charlie. They're in the art room. They're in the corner on the floor. And that's such a tender moment, and a lot of vulnerability is there. So I suggested to Andrew that to Andy that we just don't break the shot. We just continually track towards them, again, just to build up that emotion, right? And I wanted again a very wide lens, but I didn't want the lens to get tighter as I'm like getting closer to them. So I used the zoom lens to try to maintain like a very similar size frame as I'm getting closer to them with the camera. So the camera was on track, the camera was on Steadicam, and we were able to also zoom at the same time to make sure that we maintained that wide perspective, even though the camera was traveling and getting closer to them. So that was something a little bit more technical. Or, the summer fet in season 3, there was a lot of crane work, particularly around the Ferris wheel when Charlie and Tori are in the seats together. We had this, like 45-foot Scorpio techno crane where we were able to put the camera very, very high and really follow their conversation again without interrupting the scene. Even though the scene got edited later with close-ups and the medium shot, we wanted to like let the actors do their thing, and the camera was really following the movement of the Ferris wheel again, which the scale is big. So those are the technical aspects of achieving those shots that we don't really talk about that often.
I can't even imagine trying to track a Ferris wheel while trying to like film.
We had a
That
very
sounds
good
so hard.
operator. He was great. So
Yeah.
yeah, like you need, like besides having a very specific vision on what you want to achieve, you need also a great crew that, first of all, like gets you and is there to support you. And that's the brilliant thing about Heartstopper. We did really gather some amazing people, behind camera. And I feel like you can really feel that in the TV show. Like there was a lot of, warmth and sense of community between us as the crew, and I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's something we comment on all the time, where it just really feels like a cohesive team put this together, and everybody gave like 110% to whatever their job was, because it's just so high, like everything's high value about it, and it works so well, like every element. It's just that's what makes it special to us, at least.
Yeah, people work very hard, and not only that, they actually really care. And I
Yes.
think that's super important. And particularly, when I'm choosing my crew, for me, it's very important that people really want to be there and work on that project, because everybody brings in an energy that contributes. So yeah, you have to really have passion.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it definitely shines through. Um, so I want to go back to the Paris scenes that you kind of talked about earlier. So you
Mhm.
mentioned that you actually did get to film at iconic landmarks, like you mentioned the
Mhm.
Eiffel Tower and also the Louvre. But oftentimes, like filming in those locations can come with a lot of limitations because like it's historic and stuff. So how did you adapt to like the constraints of filming in those locations just because of the location itself?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. That's something that we always have to do, to an extent or another, depending on what the location is. Like, particularly in Paris, we were filming, I want to say there in July, or, it was basically high season. Like, tourists were there and people are just so keen and so busy. But actually, the location people were just so amazing, allowing us the access we need, obviously within a time frame. So, for us, it was really important to, first of all, like prioritize, like what is the scene really about, making sure that we capture that. And we were very organized, from a practical point of view. How do we get access to the location? When do we start filming? We also had an incredible first AD who's just such a brilliant mind and such a great organizer, and just us generally working very closely as a team, and within my department, communicating closely to my focus puller, to my other operator, making sure we're in the right place at the right time, and just allowing the actors and the director to do their thing. And again, like when it came to making sure that we made the best of the time, the director and I really went through those scenes, and we were like, what is essential here? What are we trying to say? What is this location giving us? And making sure that we fit in within that time. And by some miracle, we pulled it off, and we had access 2 mornings in a row. But what was crazy is that on our first morning on the Eiffel Tower, we were on the second floor, so like the highest floor on the tower. And we arrived there around like 5:30 in the morning. Anyway, there's sunrise happening, and then there's this like very heavy fog that would not go away. And we only had maybe from like 7:30 until 9 in the morning to film there. So we really wanted to make the best out of the time, but then it was just so foggy. So we found a way around it. I'm not sure can you even feel that in the shots, but we also lit it so it feels a little bit sunnier. But yeah, that was like one situation where we had to make the best out of it. On our second morning there, it was just the most beautiful sunlight. So we were rewarded. And that was just great to, like we got some beautiful flares in the camera, and everybody really felt the energy of that like sunny morning. Oh, Theora, I've lost it there. I cannot hear you anymore.
Sorry, I have my
Yeah.
dog barking. I said it's also be at work and just part of that is like a beautiful sunrise off the Eiffel Tower. Like I can't even imagine what that's like.
No, that was very special, like one of those things that you won't forget.
I'll bet. Um, so what is one technique or lesson you learned from working on Heartstopper that you'll take forward into future projects?
That's interesting. I feel like with every project you learn something. There was not no like specific lesson that I'm like, oh, I didn't know this before, and now I know. I think it's more to do with how you work together with your team. I think it's just very important, particularly in my position as a leader, of the camera department, lighting, is to make sure that people um, feel connected to what we're shooting, and there's communication between us, and create that closeness, within my crew too, to feel like everybody's just working together for something. And I could really see it, happening in front of my eyes, like people really feeling passionate about it. And I guess like I want to make sure that that happens on every project that I work on, and I do connect closely with my crew as well as with the cast. That's really important.
Honestly, that's like the dream scenario for like every job, like to carry that through. That would be incredible.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that it does really show, like, even outside of filmmaking and every type of job that you do, when you have that kind of closeness with your team, it just makes the whole journey and the work a lot more joyful.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of like joy, what was the most rewarding part of working on Heartstopper for you?
For me, it was my communication with the audience. Really, it was the people's response to what we were doing, and the love, that we were getting from the audience. And I guess also seeing that a TV show like Heartstopper can bring a lot of joy, and maybe like a means of for people to understand themselves a little bit better, particularly with very young audiences. I'm not sure how much people are taught in school about emotional intelligence, accepting yourself, loving yourself, being there for your friends, or being supported by your family. I think the message from Heartstopper, and seeing that, like being given to the audience and the audience responding to that, that's been like the greatest, like the greatest gift of being involved in a project like this. And I still see it happening. Like I put a picture of our cast on Instagram. People are really responding, and it's not so much, it's not just the love for the cast, but I think it's also the love for what the show represents that people respond to. And I think that's really amazing, and quite new for me as a DP, because you don't get that, I guess, opportunity often.
That honestly is the most beautiful response I've ever heard of why working on a show is rewarding. So I'm really happy you got that experience. And like again, just thank you in general for putting so much passion and expertise and hard work into Heartstopper. It really comes through. It's such a beautiful television show for so many
No, it's
reasons.
amazing. Yeah, I'm really happy that people feel that. And yeah, it's been a really amazing experience to be part of it.
Oh, that's great. Well, those were all the questions I have for you today, Simona. I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us and share your experience working on Heartstopper. For all the listeners at home that may want to follow your career or connect with you, is there a way they can follow you on the internet or anything?
Yeah, I'm active on social media on Instagram. I'm there, often, or there's my website with my work online if people want to see it. Very often, British cinematographer might write about my work, and they've been very generous, covering Heartstopper both seasons. So yeah, that's where people can find me.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate it. To the listeners at home, make sure you watch Heartstopper if you haven't. I don't know why you're here if you haven't, but you should. So until next time, hydrate for lesbian Jesus and gay it up all over the place. Bye. And with that, we've been Big Gay Energy. If you like this episode, check out all our other episodes right here on YouTube.
Please like, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more amazing super gay content.